So, all right, to kind of catch us up for what was going on last week, we are in Mark chapter 15. We've been going through the Gospel of Mark, and you know, I have this assumption in the Gospel of Mark that there's three powers that Mark is talking about: you know, political, our political power, our personal power, and our religious power, and all of those are basically dying on the cross type of thing. And we're seeing that with in Mark chapter 14 and 15. You see the personal power dying with Peter denying Jesus, all the disciples denying Jesus. You see all that there. The religious powers, you see their complete just sham of trials. Gloria was kind of mentioning that as she was walking in about how there's some evidence that they weren't doing things the way they should have been in there, and you can just tell by throughout the whole book of Mark that they're just trying to get them. And then there's also the political power. Now, all three of those powers all are coalescing into a homologation with like that political power there. Like that's kind of the one that back then they thought that, man, if we could just get into that kind of power, then that would solve all of our problems. You know, the Messiah is going to come and be that. And we see that even dies, and we see that on the cross. Because there's some new people here, I'm just going to try to catch up. Well, Gunter, you're pretty new here, and Pamela too. But it's one of the things we saw. But if you're listening to sermons, you heard this too. But one of the things we've really concentrated in the Bible study on Mark here is the idea of like fear and trembling. That we kind of think that is a sign of the resurrection. That so as you look out throughout the entire gospel, Jesus will often do something miraculous, bring life to somebody, all this stuff, and it's always followed around kind of fear and trembling, that kind of or amazement language, and that's the first place you see that is in chapter 2 when the guy's friends drop the paralytic guy through the roof, and Jesus heals him, and everyone is like amazed and all of those things. And the reason why this is kind of a call sign for the resurrection, that at the end of the Gospel of Mark, when the women see the angel in the tomb, you know, they are filled with fear and amazement and bewilderment type of thing. So I think Mark is being clever in his writing by saying, oh, you see this? It's a call sign for the resurrection. It's a call sign for the resurrection in his thing. And he laces in that all the way through. So that's, I just want to catch up on that. And so last week we were talking about how we've gone into this whole political power thing, and we were at the beginning of chapter 15, and Jesus has gone through the Sanhedrin, which is like the Jewish courts, and now they bring them up to the Roman courts, and Jesus. Oh, let's see, did it fall?
It's got a.
Here, we'll help you out here, guys.
Oh,
You got it. There's a little catch here.
I see.
See this guy right here?
Oh,
Nope, I broke it.
there you go. Oh, my.
There you go.
Thank you.
There you go.
You know.
It's the first couple of times no one gets it. So let's see. So then then we have and what's interesting and where you really see this is in Barabbas. You see this in Barabbas. So you know that whole thing where Jesus is under trial and Pilate's like, well, I'll give someone up to you. And Barabbas is super interesting because in verse 7 it says, and there was one named Barabbas who was chained with his fellow rebels. They had committed murder in the rebellion. And that idea right there, that there was this insurrection, there's this rebellion, this wanting to overflow Rome and get them out of the Judean countryside and Judea and from Jerusalem itself and all those things. That was the goal of the Messiah, according to Peter, according to the Jews, according to everybody, right? That was the goal of the Messiah. And so when they give him the option of Barabbas, the people see that Jesus isn't going to be that Messiah, that one that's going to come like Judas Maccabees. You're familiar with Judas Maccabees? Are you familiar with him? That's so. All right, we're all the way back. Here we go. So Judas Maccabees. Do you remember? You've heard me talk about Judas Maccabees?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay, all right, cool. We got all kinds of.
I only heard of it last week.
Yeah. All right. So Judas Maccabees. This is my big thing because I think understanding who Judas Maccabees is critical to understanding the crucifixion of Jesus. All right. So to begin this talk, have you ever wondered why we don't celebrate Hanukkah in the Christian church? Because Hanukkah was around before Jesus, about 100 years before Jesus. Jesus would have celebrated Hanukkah. It's the Feast of Dedication and John, all those things. And what happened is that the Greeks, Alexander the Great, had come and conquered all this land. And the Jews are not a very big fan of that, with this. And this guy kind of ends up rising up from within them named Judas Maccabees. His nickname is the Hammer. And he ends up kind of leading a successful rebellion against the Greeks, basically kicks the Greeks out of Jerusalem. And he kicks the Greeks out of Jerusalem. And what the Greek chieftain, kind of king over that area, had done as kind of to really upset the Jews is he had turned the temple into a temple of Zeus worship and had sacrificed pigs there and all that stuff, and all of that. So that really upset everyone. So Judas Maccabeus goes in, leads a successful insurrection, kicks the Greeks out. He then comes in to Jerusalem after doing this to shouts of "Save us, save us, save us, save us," which in Aramaic and Hebrew is Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna. All right, to shouts and people waving palm fronds all in the air. All right, and he comes riding into Jerusalem under those same things. That should sound like Palm Sunday, right? So like he comes in under all, remember this is 100 years before Jesus. And so they come shouting all those things. The first thing he does is goes to the temple and he cleanses the temple from all the Zeus worship, takes all the Zeus things out of there, cleanses it up from all the pig blood and all that stuff, cleanses it up, sets everything up for worship, sets the menorah up. But they only have enough oil for one night, right? But it miraculously lasts 10.
8.
8. Sorry, I don't know days. Like yeah, 8. Yeah, it miraculously lasts 8 days. That's Hanukkah. But you can see in that story there are definite how Jesus comes into Jerusalem. To all those same shouts to me indicate that all these people wanted Jesus to be the Messiah that they had in their own head. They wanted him to be like Judas Maccabeus. And they goes in there, and if you look in there, the gospel writers don't want you to miss it because they all knew the story of Judas Maccabeus. That's and you can just read about the story of Hanukkah. This is the story of Hanukkah. All the gospels, except for John. John has different goals in his writing. The Matthew, Mark, and Luke, as soon as Jesus comes in on Palm Sunday, he goes in and he cleanses the temple right after. He goes straight to the temple. So he's replaying what Judas Maccabeus did. right? He's replaying that, except he doesn't kick the Romans out. He cleanses the temple from our own greed and sin and all these things. All right. So you see there that is what is happening. This is their goal for Jesus. And in a way, he keeps disappointing them. Now, he's not disappointing everybody. There are people that are getting a lot of healing off of him, but the religious leaders of the day, they start whipping up the crowds, which we still see to this day by our political leaders that want power over any other kind of unity or actual doing anything for people, right? Whip up the crowds and all this stuff in order to kill him. And when Pilate asked them, do you want me to release Barabbas to you or Jesus? By the way, what we know about Barabbas, and this is important detail, every word is important in these Gospels, that he committed murder in the rebellion. So he's already tried to do what they want Jesus to do. And the whole reason why he's in prison is because he was fairly successful at it. And so you could see now that they want all three of these powers, the personal power, the religious power, the political power, have all congealed into one big choice. And that's Barabbas or Jesus. And Jesus isn't giving them the power that they want. So they choose Barabbas, right? So that's a very quick version of that story. It intertwines with Hanukkah. Like, it's all kinds of fun stuff. And so they put it all in here. And so you get to 15. So Pilate, wanting to gratify the crowd, release Barabbas to them, and delivered Jesus after he is to be he was to be scourged. Now, to be crucified. Yeah. And you could see the gospel writer here, he's saying the chief priest has handed him over because of envy. He calls him like, what do you want me to do with who you call the king of the Jews? And they want nothing of it. You could see that they want nothing to do with Jesus having that title and all these things. It's complete rejection of Jesus, right? So then we get into the fun today. And I should have been more ready. I tried to print some stuff, but it wouldn't print. I'm not sure why that was, but it's called the Roman Triumph. It's called the Roman Triumph. And if you search just Roman Triumph, you'll come up with, and I'll share this screen with you guys on the Zooms here. So let's see here, share sound, optimize for video, and then we'll do share. Oh man, now it's moved my thing here. Let me stop share real quick. Let me see here. So here, let me show you how you can get to it on our website. Let's see. So let me get back into Zoom here and then share screen. So if you go on our website, if you go to Jesus Triumphal March to Crucifixion, you just search this. There's two articles in here. Here's one that says Jesus Triumphal March to Crucifixion. And then there's a Roman Triumph on Wikipedia. So this, we'll kind of look at both of those here for a second. Let me get the link over here. But the Roman Triumph, it's going to be kind of hard to see one-to-one, but so we're not going to spend a ton of time on this, but I'm just trying to give you some joy. So you can see this is a Roman article here. So the Roman Triumph was a civil ceremony, religious rite of ancient Rome, held to publicly celebrate and sanctify the success of military commander who led Roman forces to victory in the service of the state or in other historical traditions, who had successfully completed a foreign war. On the day of his triumph, the general wore a crown of laurel. Okay, that should sound familiar. All purple, gold embroidered triumphal toga, regaled and identified him as a near divine or near kingly. In some accounts, his face was painted red, perhaps in imitation of Rome's highest and most powerful god, Jupiter. The general role in the 4-horse chariot through the streets. The general rode in a 4-horse chariot through the streets of Rome in an unarmed procession with his armies, captives, and the spoils of war. At Jupiter's temple on Capitoline Hill. What does capital mean in like Greek? It means head. At Head Hill, he offered sacrifice and the tokens of his victory to god Jupiter. The Republican tradition, only the Senate could grant a triumph. The origins and development of this honor were obscure. Roman historians place the first triumph in the mystical past. Republican morality required the general to conduct himself with a dignified humility and moral, let's see here. This kind of ended up moving into the realm of the Caesars. Let's see here. So you probably saw some things that were familiar in this. You can read about this. This is just on Wikipedia. It's called the Roman Triumph. Let me pull up the other article real quick so you can see that. Boom, boom, boom. Here it is. This is from a theologian who has connected the Roman triumph to the crucifixion. All right. So the scholars have long recognized that the evangelists do not simply report the events of Jesus' life. They select, arrange, modify material at their disposal to stress the important themes, like the connection between Jesus and the Old Testament and the inclusion of the Gentiles and the kingdom and the nature of discipleship. Mark's gospel was probably, I'm not going to read this whole thing, I'm just going to read the beginning here, was written for a Gentile Christians living in Rome. Could this audience have understood the various allusions to the Hebrew Bible worked into Mark's narrative? On the other hand, Mark's contemporaries might have well grasped a pattern of meaning that was gone unrecognized by modern Bible commentators. In Mark's gospel, the crucifixion procession is a kind of Roman triumph march, with Jerusalem's Via Dolorosa replacing the Sacra Via of Rome. In this way, Mark presents Jesus' defeat and death and the moment of his greatest suffering and humiliation as both literally and figuratively a triumph. Okay, what he's basically saying, and this is how I've come to understand it, and this is what I think is going on now, is that Mark is throwing sand in the powers in a Caesar in Rome. And it starts at the very beginning, and then it kind of dies out as he crafts his work about Jesus. But at the very beginning, the very first words about Jesus, let me get to it, are let's see here. Mark chapter 1, verse 1, the beginning of the good news about Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God. That thing, like we normally think it's like, oh, okay, yeah, it's God's son and all that stuff. But Son of God was a title for Caesar. It was a title for Caesar. Because when a Caesar was lifted up, the previous Caesar, who he's the son of, when everything was going perfectly, which we saw Rome kind of descend into madness there at the end, but when things are going perfectly, a Caesar would become a god. And so a current reigning Caesar would then be a son of God, right? So this, right at the beginning of the Gospel of Mark, he's saying this layered thing that's throwing sand in Caesar and in Rome's power's face. And that power gets picked up again by obviously standing before Pilate, right? Standing before Pilate, and with the power of and those, and this is Chris Escher here. No one really. We'll say it's Chris Escher and Gloria, because Gloria was a big part of the original Mark Bible study during COVID. That we kind of went all. This is when we were trying to do all the Zooms, and I don't know. I think I had just Gloria in person. Yeah. I think like that's during that, because that was like in the throes of COVID. Well, I said, but I was going through it with the confirmation students. I was going there, and I was like, gosh, this three powers thing is really here. And I think they all combine into this one thing. So last week I talked about what we're looking at here. And this Bible here in the study notes kind of goes through it. So with this thing, so I'll read these study notes again for us, and then we'll read the crucifixion of Jesus. All right. Now, before I do that, let me have a disclaimer. There's a lot of people that disagree with the things that I'm saying. That's fine. That's fine. You don't have to agree with me. You just have to if you want to be happy in this life. That's all. Like that's like just kidding. Like you guys are new to the jokes. Like that's no. I don't mind if people disagree with me and all that stuff. But when you read Mark in the totality of it, it suddenly makes sense with the coalescing of the powers, and then all of a sudden they want him to defeat Rome. He does, but it's not in the way that they wanted. But it's ultimately the way that the Jesus people are still here, and Rome is a tourist destination, type of thing. So, all right, I'm going to read the whole note here. The particular image that Mark highlights as Jesus approached to the cross has strong imperial overtones. The soldiers seem to have been reenacting either the ascension of Caesar to the throne or Caesar's triumphant processions after a great victory. Jesus was given a bitterly cruel coronation ceremony of mockery. This would have struck Mark's Roman audience as particularly powerful, echoing the opening lines of Mark's gospel that challenged Roman imperial claims. The following parallels are very strong. So here's the parallels. And you can follow along. So verse 16, and this is what would have been happening in Rome with this Roman triumph. The Praetorian Guard is gathered around the Caesar. Caesar is, in verse 17 and 18, Caesar is given the robe of Jupiter, a scepter, and an olive branch crown while being claimed, "Hail Caesar." Verse 21, royal procession through the streets of Rome while leading a sacrificial bull. Verse 22, procession arrived at Capitoline Hill, Head Hill in Rome. Golgotha means place of the skull. Caesar, this is verse 23. Caesar was given a bowl of wine mixed with myrrh, which he sacrificially refused and poured onto the ground. Verse 24, that bull was slaughtered. And verse 27, Caesar climbed the steps of the temple of Jupiter with his royal officials on his right and his left. And verse 29 through 32, the crowds acclaimed Caesar and sang his praises. Now, before everyone got in here, I think Scott had walked in here and stuff like that. I was playing a video on there, and it's longer than what I want to play here, and it's a little more confusing, but it's HBO did a show called Rome, and they, like, I was sitting there watching them, like, all those elements are in that. So you can go on YouTube and you can search Roman triumph, and you can see various videos of this. And here's the interesting thing about them. None of them are coming from a Christian perspective. They're all coming from historical perspectives of what was going on in Rome. So you can watch those and put it together. Or you can think that Pastor Chris is full of garbage, which there's a lot of people that believe that. I'm comfortable with that now, like all that stuff. So let's read Mark chapter, with all that in our head, let's read about the crucifixion. So let's see, we're halfway through. Let's see. We'll start at verse 6. That's just kind of doing the Barabbas thing as a way of shooting off into the rest of it. So chapter 15, verse 6 of the Gospel of Mark. For you guys that are in here, we read off of the New King James. If you can watch it in your own Bible, you can just watch it on the screen. You can just listen to it. if your translation says something that's different and it kind of matters to it, let us know. That's how we find out what's actually going on in the text. All right, so let me share the screen and then we'll go. Here we go. Oh, verse 6 is what I said.
Now at the feast, he was accustomed to releasing one prisoner to them, whomever they requested. And there was one named Barabbas, who was chained with his fellow rebels. They had committed murder in the rebellion. Then the multitude, crying aloud, began to ask him to do just as he had always done for them. But Pilate answered them,
"Do you want me to release to you the King of the Jews?"
For he knew that the chief priests had handed him over because of envy. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd, so that he should rather release Barabbas to them.
"What then do you want me to do with him whom you call the King of the Jews?"
So they cried out again.
"Why? What evil has he done?"
But they cried out all the more. So Pilate, wanting to gratify the crowd, released Barabbas to them. And he delivered Jesus, after he had scourged him, to be crucified. Then the soldiers led him away into the hall called Praetorium, and they called together the whole garrison. And they clothed him with purple, and they twisted a crown of thorns, put it on his head, and began to salute him.
Hail, King of the Jews! Hail, King of the Jews!
Then they struck him on the head with a reed, and spat on him. And bowing the knee, they worshipped him. And when they had mocked him, they took the purple off him, put his own clothes on him, and led him out to crucify him. Then they compelled a certain man, Simon a Cyrenian, the father of Alexander and Rufus, as he was coming out of the country and passing by, to bear his cross. And they brought him to the place Golgotha, which is translated, place of a skull. Then they gave him wine mingled with myrrh to drink, but he did not take it. And when they crucified him, they divided his garments, casting lots for them to determine what every man should take. Now it was the 3rd hour, and they crucified him. And the inscription of his accusation was written above, "The King of the Jews." With him, they also crucified 2 robbers, one on his right and the other on his left. So the scripture was fulfilled which says, "And he was numbered with the transgressors." And those who passed by blasphemed him, wagging their heads and saying,
Aha! You who destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross.
Likewise, the chief priests also, mocking among themselves with the scribes.
"He saved others, himself he cannot save. Let the Christ, the King of Israel, descend now from the cross, that we may see and believe."
Even those who were crucified with him reviled him. Now, when the 6th hour had come, there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. And at the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying,
Elo, lama sabachthani.
which is translated,
My God, why have you forsaken me?
Some of those who stood by when they heard that said,
Look, he's calling for Elijah.
Then someone ran and filled a sponge full of sour wine, put it on a reed and offered it to him to drink.
Let him alone. Let us see if Elijah will come to take him down.
And Jesus cried out with a loud voice and breathed his last. Then the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. So when the centurion who stood opposite him saw that he cried out like this and breathed his last, he said,
Truly this man was the Son of God.
There were also women looking on from afar, among whom was Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James the Less and of Joses, and Salome, who also followed him and ministered to him when he was in Galilee, and many other women who came up with him to Jerusalem. Now, when evening had come, because it was the preparation day, that is, the day before the Sabbath, Joseph of Arimathea, a prominent council member, who was himself waiting for the kingdom of God, coming and taking courage, went into Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Pilate marveled that he was already dead, and summoning the centurion, he asked him if he had been dead for some time. So when he found out from the centurion, he granted the body to Joseph. Then he bought fine linen, took him down, and wrapped him in the linen. And he laid him in a tomb which had been hewn out of the rock, and rolled a stone against the door of the tomb. And Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of Joses observed where he was laid.
Okay. All right. Let me stop sharing here. Okay. All right. So here's what I want us to do now. Mark, brilliant writing here, is wrapping up in the crucifixion of Jesus and in his burial a bunch of storylines that were started earlier, and he's wrapping them up and all of those things. So what, as we were reading this, what was sounding interesting and familiar to you in the crucifixion of Jesus? And did you catch any of those storylines? It can just be anything that you think is interesting too.
Yeah, like you said before, all of the proceedings being the same as a Roman king would receive a Roman.
It's hard not to see it then.
Yeah, exactly the same.
Yeah, like it's
also, if anybody is interested in the Maccabees,
yeah.
the Catholic Bible in the middle section, the Apocrypha, has those stories.
It's in First Maccabees. That's a book. That's a book. Yeah. So we don't really view the Maccabees as inspired, but they really reading the Apocrypha can really get you in the sense of getting ready for Jesus and what was going on in Judaism at the time. So it can give you a real sense.
Sorry for the aside.
No. It reads like your dishwater tastes, though. So just be ready for that. Like that.
Everybody knows my roommate now. When Diane started reading the first Maccabees, she got to the second page and said, I will not read any more of this. It's disgusting. So just so you know.
Yeah. So forewarned. They okay. So anything else? What else? What else kind of stood out to you? Anything? Did you recognize any previous storylines or anything like that that are getting wrapped up? Nobody? All right, let's talk about them. Let's talk about them then. All right, so the one about the two things about the Roman thing. I won't dwell on that. I kind of spent the first half on that, but I think the evidence to why that's necessary in the reading of Mark is that he in verse 16 he goes, the soldiers led him away and to the hall called Praetorium. He didn't have to name it, and he did. And then he says, and he called together the whole garrison. Just using that language. The other one is when he took to Golgotha, and he took the time to translate it place of the skull. He wants you to know. He wants you to know that it's place of the skull. And so that's like, there's these little details in there, and it's like, he's like, this sounds like head hill, like that's, he wants you to see it. He wants you to see it. That's what I think. So one of them is one of the storylines that's getting wrapped up here is verse 32. Verse 32. So the Christ, the King of Israel, descend now from the cross that we may see and believe. So we have all these people are reviling him, right? First off, his disciples aren't anywhere to be seen. They're long gone. You have all the passerbys, yelling at him. It's like he's, you said you're going to destroy the temple, and you're not doing it. So we go back to the Apocalypse chapter, back to that chapter 13 of Mark, when the disciples go, "Oh my goodness, Jesus, look at these wonderful buildings."
Yeah.
Look at all of this wonderful stuff. And Jesus basically says, you need to be careful about all that. When you put your hope in the midst of your own accomplishments, when your hope is only in that, you're going to self-destruct. You're going to destruct the things that are actually good. And so we have this call back then. And that's what the chapter 13 of Mark's all about. It's this Apocalypse chapter. And he's basically saying, it's like, you guys want nothing but warfare and power. And like, this is what you want. And it's going to slap you in the face. I think that chapter is a good warning for us. That a lot of times we want warfare and power, and that we're willing to hurt anyone to get it a lot of times. And so I think we need to go a different way than that. We may end up getting what we got, and we kind of see that here. And we see in chapter 13 of Mark that Jesus said the temple was going to be thrown down. Oh, and it was like 72 years later. It was destroyed. They have the Wailing Wall now after that. And then now you hear these people calling back to that. It's like, you said you're going to destroy the temple, and look at you getting destroyed. It's almost like a 1-to-1, like, oh, like this is what he was talking about. It's like you were so enamored with making sure that, and now here is the crucifixion of our Lord. And the Christian church, we have this deep tradition of our sins put him on the cross, and that's that reference, that our sins, our desires of power, our desires of all these things, that those are the things that put him on the cross. And we see that connection there in that thing. He saved others, he can't save himself. The chief priests are mocking him. So there's religious leaders who should have seen him, and they're just enamored with their own selves. They're over there. And then it says, even those who were crucified with him reviled him. Now that's a nice tidy line for the Roman thing. That's also a tidy line for the Roman thing with, like the people on his right and left type of thing. But that's also a tidy line that happens earlier. Now, who else wanted to be at Jesus' right and left? Do you remember?
Yeah, James and John. Right?
James and John. Why are we not very loud?
John and Peter.
Yeah. Can you talk again, Lee?
Yeah, it was the brothers, right? James and John, they wanted to be on the right and the left.
Yeah, remember they came up after the rich young ruler. They came up to Jesus and they're like, Jesus, we want you to grant for us whatever we ask. And we want to be at the right and the left in your glory. Mm-hmm. Now, as we look back at the Maccabees, as we look back at all this stuff, what are they talking about? They want to ascend those steps with Jesus in the middle, like Caesar ascends those steps of power, and they want to be at their right and their left. See that? And do you remember what Jesus says to them?
You don't want to take it.
He doesn't know who's going to be this right and left.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, and they don't know. They don't, and he goes, you don't know what you're asking for. And so then we see the two that were on his right and left in his glory. It's the criminals.
How about where it says he'll be on the right hand of God?
Well, I think that
He's been in there.
yeah, I think that is a cosmic sense of where Jesus is.
Not saying.
Yeah. So I think these were located kind of in this story, with the crucifixion and all that stuff, because you can see what Mark is doing. He's ascending Jesus to a higher place than even Caesar. But the higher place than Caesar in the realm of the world is like the crucifixion and resurrection, like the planting of a seed and the coming up of a plant. Like that's the ascension and not in these worldly powers, but in these other things. And so it's a mockery of Caesar. But James and John's request, we're seeing that storyline wrap up here. That even the people on his right and left are, they're reviling him, those crucified with him. Let's see here. Then, and then the 6th hour had come. There was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. What does that make you think of? Like, what does that make you think of? In the 6th hour, there's darkness over the whole land. To me, it's got creation overtones. I think it sounds similar. I don't think you can do a 1-to-1 with it, but like these gospel writers are making make things sound a certain way, right? That it's almost like this anti-creation, is kind of around with darkness all over it. Darkness also harkens back to that kind of, not the final plague, but the second to last plague in Egypt. That when darkness came over everyone, followed by death and all that stuff. Like, so you have all these like coming back ideas here, wrapping up into the crucifixion of Jesus.
I think it also speaks to the stealing of the light that comes from Jesus.
Yeah. And I think that's that same idea is all coming in and around there. Yeah. And so, and then we have, and this has become one of my favorite funeral sermons now, is in the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, the Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which, so you heard of Elohim. Elohim is a plural ending. So Elohim is God. Technically it'd be gods, but they're trying to make God sound bigger, so they make it plural in Hebrew. Eloi is kind of like is adjusted a little bit of El. So it's like a singular, it's like a personal noun declension of El, which is God, like all that stuff. And to make everyone feel uncomfortable, you have Allah, from Arabic, El, it's God, like that. That's like that. It's just different language, same word. The Muslims never do the plural declension. So they go which is singular. So if the Hebrews were doing the same thing that Islam did, they would have Elah, would be singular there in the language. So it's just really similar word, and I like to point that out around. So it's God, why have you forsaken me? And what does that come from? Do you guys remember? Jesus is quoted. Yeah.
I can't remember.
It's Psalm 22. 22. And so Psalm 22, which is the Psalm of just utter brokenness and all that. So when you see these people in the Bible quoting these, they're quoting those certain words, but they're using that to get to this whole idea of that Psalm. And what's beautiful about that idea there is you have Psalm 22, But Psalm 22 goes right into Psalm 23, which is the Lord is my shepherd, I lack for nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And if remember, right, like on the feeding of the 4,000, what was Jesus looking at? Like he looked at the people coming out to hear him, and he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And this was right after King Herod had killed John the Baptist, and these religious leaders are not wanting doing, the Caesar's not doing anything for the people. They're without a shepherd. And I think this calling back to this, my God, why you've forsaken me, this utter bitterness, but it's kind of showing us that Jesus is that good shepherd all at the same time, as it's kind of all pulling in and seeing kind of the big picture of it here. I think that one's a bit of a stretch, but I think it's fun. So then let's see here. Then verse 35, then some of those who stood by when they heard that said, look, he is calling for Elijah. Now, and someone ran and filled a sponge with sour wine and put it on a reed and offered it to him to drink. Then they're like, let him alone, see if Elijah will come and bring him down. And I feel like that's a callback to something too. What's that a callback to?
Transfiguration.
The transfiguration, right? Transfiguration, and also one other time too. The transfiguration, and one other time. There's another time Elijah's mentioned with Jesus.
John the Baptist called Elijah at one time.
John the Baptist is like the way the Gospels treat John the Baptist, especially the Synoptics, is that John the Baptist is Elijah. He's not Elijah, but he is reincarnated as Elijah. But remember also when Herod asked about John the Baptist, and some people, and he's asked about Jesus, and like, who is this Jesus? Some are saying that he's like a prophet, or he's John the Baptist, or he's like Elijah, right? So I think you have the transfiguration idea, which that was the transfiguration when Elijah showed up with Moses, is another sign of that he's the true Messiah, right? Does that understand what I'm trying? And now you have the same people asking. It's like, we'll see what Elijah does. And along that same asking, it's like, well, who do you say that I am? When he said that, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah. That was a time when Peter said, you are the Christ, right? Like, you are the Christ. Like, all these things, like, they're loose connections, but you can kind of see, it's like, why are they starting talking about Elijah here? Like, Mark didn't write anything on accident like that. So is he calling us back to remember the stories previously in the midst of his suffering, and remembering the times, the transfiguration, the times when Herod thought he was asking a question, and when Jesus asked, well, who do people say him? Who do you say him? And it's reminding us again that he's the Christ there. So Jesus cried out in a loud voice and breathed his last. And that breathed is a great word there too, where it's that connected with that spirit and all that stuff. But at least to me, that sounds like Adam. Yeah. Like the taking in, and that's just he could have said that any other way, but he's using these specific words and how he's doing these. He breathed his last, and then it says, and then the veil in the temple was torn in two from top to bottom.
I breathe, same as wind.
Yeah.
I mean, I always saw the temple, the temple curtains being torn as a sign of God has now broken the barrier between us, but never made the association with Jesus's last breath or his last wind, and the temple curtain is ripped.
Yeah. Like there's all these things going on here.
Did you ever hear how thick it was?
How thick is the?
It was like, it's either 6 or 7 inches thick.
Not just a thick.
When you think how thick that was.
Yeah.
Didn't just apart easily.
Yeah, yeah. And so like, and this is a good reminder of what temple theology is. Like someone asked me, it's like, what do you believe in this for? I'm like, well, I'm really big into this temple theology. It's kind of what I call it, is that the temple in Judaism was the hotspot of God's presence. That was God's presence in the world. So if you think about a Venn diagram, you have like the world, and you have the other circle is like God's presence, right? And in the Garden of Eden, when God created the world and all that stuff before the sin, they were one and the same, right? And so then they were broken apart, and then God established his presence in the world again through his people. And that was in the tabernacle, in the temple, that Venn diagram overlapped in that spot. So now, as we see with the coming of the Spirit in Pentecost, in John, when Christ breathes on them, the ripping of the veil in here, that Venn diagram is now broken, but we see that the Spirit now alights onto us. And we are those places where the presence of God is going out into the world, that we are those temples now as we go out there, that it's not just the temple. That veil has been torn, and that the Spirit of God and the presence of God rests in the world and in us. So that's cool there. And then to top it all off here, 39. So when the centurion who stood opposite to him saw that he cried out like this and breathed his last, like doing this both, he said, Mark chapter 1, verse 1, truly this man is the Son of God. Mm-hmm. Now, allow that to sink in. Remember, that's a title for Caesar. That's a title for Caesar. And a Roman, not a Hebrew, not one of the disciples, not someone that followed Jesus, a Roman military official says that this guy is the true deal. That it's not Caesar, it's not the guy in Rome. It sits out, and then you have that completion of the triumph over Caesar, and all that that Mark's kind of full arc is coming due here. That the powers of the world actually have no power, and this guy recognized it. And then you have the women, and notice the women are all mentioned here. That's you got to remember, in Roman culture and Hebrew culture, women were not high on the pecking order. They're very low. For them to get mentioned here is a big deal. And for us to not recognize that in how we practice and all that stuff, I think says a lot to the power structures that we still try to hold to, right? And so all this in verse 41, who also followed him and ministered to him when he was in Galilee, and many other women who came up with him to Jerusalem. And then verse 42, and when evening had come, because it was the day of preparation, that is the day of the Sabbath, Joseph of Arimathea, a prominent council member who was himself waiting for the kingdom of God. Did Joseph have a storyline earlier in Mark? Do you guys remember that? Am I making that up?
I don't remember it.
I'm wondering if I had a dream.
Didn't he have a conversation with Jesus at some point?
Like I think he did. Like that's because I think Ed, you said something about it, but it could have been like I didn't. I should have.
A lot of things don't they?
Yeah, I know, right?
Wait till you get to be.
Yeah.
here.
I thought he had I thought there was.
In Matthew 27:57, it describes him as this rich man and a disciple of Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the same part.
Not Mark.
I thought it was, well, and that's the same. 27 is the same
And
stuff.
some thought he was an uncle of Jesus.
Yeah. I
according
can't
to what I read.
I can't remember.
It's also in Luke chapter 23, verse 50 to 56,
Okay.
according to what I just pulled up. So he's in there more than once.
Yeah. I'll have to look again.
It's just described him and where.
Yeah.
So if he's an uncle, then he might have been in that story with Mary and.
Well, and it's also important. So let's just read the words on the page. So, prominent council member. So think about how the council, the Jewish council, treated Jesus. And so you now have the powers of the world. You have the Roman official saying that truly this man's the Son of God. And now you have another religious official, the religious power, also recognizing him, coming out, and you have Mary Magdalene and the women disciples recognizing him as well. So those three powers then are almost being redeemed at the same time as they're coming out.
Yeah.
Can I share something from my study Bible on that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Real quickly, there was a woman that wrote something about a metaphor saying Jesus was like fireworks in reverse.
Okay, yeah.
And she said, fireworks explode with brilliant, dazzling colors and loud noises, yet they start out in an ordinary looking paper package. When God became a man, the opposite happened. The creator of everything in the universe confined himself to an unimpressive human package. And then it says at no other point in history did the fireworks appear so powerless as the day when Jesus died. They had not yet been lit.
No, okay. Yeah. No, that's interesting. So I think you have those three powers then are talking about that. And Ed, you wanted to say something, you know what it was?
Just was Joseph of Arimathea, a respected member of the higher Jewish court, making sure that Jesus is buried properly is a risky move for this man.
Yeah. So I think and I hadn't really seen that before. If you have the centurion, you have Joseph of Arimathea, and you have all the women listed as the lady disciples, it's almost like those three powers are in the midst of being redeemed as well, after he dies. And
I would think too with the centurion saying that right there, that even he took a chance.
Oh yeah, no, he's taking a chance. He's taking a chance too. So like that. So I think next week we'll go into the resurrection here, and we'll also talk about what we should do with the ending of Mark, like all of that stuff, because most of our translations have in between 8 and 9 has the earliest manuscripts and other ancient witnesses do not include 9 through 20. So we'll talk about that. We'll read it and listen, and I'll let you guys decide however you want to go on that. That's my friend Mark. He kind of was doing a similar thing, and someone said to him, "It's like, from how you're teaching this, he goes, you're not talking about it all, but you're making it seem like we shouldn't pay attention to that at the end." Like all that stuff, and he's like, I don't know, we're just doing Bible study here. So we'll look at that next week. That'll be an interesting conversation. And but I think it's fascinating looking at the crucifixion and seeing how all those storylines that were created earlier are wrapping up, and then just seeing it now, looking at this with the Roman centurion, with the women disciples, and with Joseph and Arimathea, you have the religious power, personal power, and the political power, all kind of being redeemed in the midst of his death now as well. And it's just beautiful storytelling, right? It's beautiful storytelling as Mark is showing his side of the crucifixion and the resurrection of Jesus, the Son of God. So good deal. So thanks for coming, everybody, and all those good things. And for everyone watching online, thanks so much.